Welcome, my name is Matt, aka RoadJedi88. We're getting into Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes mod, Resistance Pilot. And anyone who is given the title Resistance is acknowledged from the sequel trilogy. I come from the George Lucas era generation of Star Wars. And in that generation is the understanding that the majority of Star Wars was always in the books. When Disney got Star Wars, their screenwriters, well, first of all, their producers claimed that there was no fan base. They now have a fan war because there was a fan base. And my generation has been largely offended by what Disney has done with Star Wars, starting with the sequel trilogy. They completely dismissed Young Jedi Knights book series, as well as the New Jedi Order book series. The Young Jedi Knight book series explains Luke Skywalker putting together the Jedi Academy, the various different students he took in, including his niece and nephews from Han and Leia. Their kids being Jason and Jaden Solo. They're twins, brother-sister twins, oldest, and then their younger brother, Anakin Solo. Then the New Jedi Order, a lot of things are happening. They're kind of losing their attention against the Imperial Remnants. They've thinned down the Imperial Remnants a great deal. In fact, they really thinned them down hard by the Young Jedi Knights. New Jedi Order, you have an outside galaxy threat coming in, invading, from a species known as the Yuuzhan Vongs. That literally, with the second season of Ahsoka, where they're going with the Mandalorian and Grogu, wherever they're trying to go with it, if they really want to cool down the fan war from my generation against the Disney producers of Star Wars, because there's various elements to the fan war. There has been little fan wars based on, I prefer the puppeteering type stuff over CGI, that kind of fan war. Or, the various different reasons why Jar Jar is a fan hate. There's literally multiple reasons on that. There are, the fan war gets very wide ranged. But one of them is when Disney took on Star Wars and they claimed that there was no fan base at all. Okay, you don't end up with having a franchise signed over you if there was no fan base. If anything, it would probably be likely to be scrapped before it's signed over. Secondly, the majority of the stories were in the books, and it was literally spoon-fed to Disney. Like, spoon-fed what to do with the sequel trilogy, and they went nowhere near even trying. Not even close. Like, everyone calls it Star Wars. They say my generation is the lore, legend. They're saying theirs is canon. Star Trek does not have this problem. They do the timeline jumping. They do the reboot with the timeline jumping, but they even had a story in place to back that up. And they still kept true and respectable to the original Star Trek generations. Paramount did not do the Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek, the way Disney did this George Lucas' Star Wars. And there would be no lore, there would be no legend, there would be no canon. Muddy water confusion had Disney just stuck with what was spoon-fed to them and acted as if there was no fan base, which is now now the big confusion of the fan war has expanded so hard that if you look back at when it first sparked, when it very first sparked, it would have been because of this. But it has become a big, expanded, blown out of proportion, misconcepted thing. When you go to Star Trek, if you want to have a fan war, it's over something as minor as who's the better captain. Is it Captain Picard, Captain Kirk, Captain Archer? Those are your fan wars over Star Trek. Here is like, what the heck? It almost makes Star Trek look better in comparison. unfortunately. And I hate saying that because I grew up passionately with Star Wars. You know, I grew up very passionate for Star Wars, fanatically. I'm just as much of a fan for Star Trek, but if you look at the two different franchises and the fan wars that they have, it really does make Star Wars look bad. It really makes Disney look bad with what they've done to Star Wars, more than anything. I know there's expensive suggestions they can make that is being made to them, but we also are well aware of Disney's infamous greed history. We're well aware of this. This is nothing new to my generation. We know this. Paramount did what Disney did not do, and they took the previous generation into consideration, and they respected that. Disney did not. Now my generation has to figure out how to accept and adapt this concept of Legend of Lore, and we're trying our best. Believe me, we are. But it is not easy because, say you grew up knowing Harry Potter one way, then all of a sudden they get signed over to another production company. They say you don't exist, and they write a whole new story in place after they promise you they will take good care of it. And you go in, you watch that new production company's new feature of Harry Potter, and it literally is nothing what you grew up with. That is what Disney did to my generation of Star Wars, basically. So, and I'm just using Harry Potter as an example. I know the younger generation, they got their own franchise stuff that they have grown up, adapted, and followed, and are loving, that I'm probably just, outdated on to have kept up. I don't have kids of my own either, so it's hard for me to keep up with that kind of stuff. But just taking the perception, the mentality that my generation is going through when it comes to Disney and what they have done with Star Wars. That's all I'm simply pointing out. And maybe getting kind of help find a way to stop adding fuel to the fire of the fan war that's been put in place. Because when it first sparked, it was because Disney changed the story. That's where it started. Resistance. To call a pilot or a trooper or any member resistance after somehow the largely dissolved Imperial remnant somehow bounced the Republic back into exile somehow again, with no backstory to back that up. They would not have. I do not see them going off and changing their names to Resistance. They'd go back to the Rebels. I don't know why they would go with Resistance. That was Disney right there. Once again, their screenwriters. Disney is so quick to have the screenwriters quickly draw up a screenplay, but never once do they read a single book. And speaking as a published book author, that's embarrassing. Largely embarrassing. Before I go writing a book, I do some research every time. These guys clearly did not. So, I gotta breathe. But with Star Wars, there is a lot of confusion when it comes to fan wars, and it's largely because Disney does not follow these two book series, nor the Bounty Hunter Wars book series trilogy set. They literally have disrespected my generation's respect for these particular books that we were holding Disney accountable to follow through with. And then they had the audacity to say we did not exist. You don't get a fan war or a franchise if there's no fan base. Just throwing that out there. But coming back to Resistance Pilot, if you go to swgoh.gg online website, they recommended speed and potency. If you go to my first mod video playlist, I break down the various different types of character roles as well as the various different types of mods by definition of each one, and explain what it is we are doing when we apply certain mods to certain characters. Resistance Pilot is an attacker character. Once again, same as the in-game tips. Online website, swgoh.gg, recommended speed and potency. If you look at his abilities that are going to be affected by these mods, he has physical damage abilities and chance abilities. I'm seeing reasons for critical damage and critical chance out of that one. Physical and chance, once again. Evasion, okay, I see speed for that. Turn meter, maybe critical chance. But speed and potency is only effective for that last ability. Those other two abilities kind of imply critical damage and critical chance. I question the legitimacy of the swgoh.gg's fan statistical preference. As this is kind of a character that's not a big name drop. He's also not a member of a squad that is preferable to utilize against various different opponent situations. He is probably definitely on the list, as I've mentioned before, of just the type of characters that is probably easily undermined and underutilized. And when the fan statistics that we have modded, the same as the in-game tips, and I have seen autoplay literally make suicidal stunts with my characters. So, granted, that's autoplay, but the in-game tips, that's just tips. You got to still test the guy out and manually to see how he functions. When you look at his abilities and you see damage and chances being mentioned, my thought right off the bat is amplifying his attacker abilities with critical damage and critical chance. Now, I went with the speed and potency. Again, I'm one of the many that probably don't even use this guy. He's not the first name I think of. He's not the first squad group I think of to go to. So I know very little about this guy. And I'm being straightforward and honest about this. But if we can test him out with speed and potency, because the in-game tips may not be too far wrong on that. But as an attacker, he already has speed laced into his abilities. Critical damage and critical chance, it would increase his odds of being able to guarantee that he hits his mark when he targets on him and actually does damage. And since that's already a part of his ability, you'd be doubling his ability efforts with critical damage and critical chance. So that is something to maybe weigh in, take into consideration. Suggestion to keep in the back pocket. That is not where I meant to go. I meant to go here. If you want, again, there is at the bottom right corner assigned loadouts, secondary loadouts, that if between the two different variants of his abilities, as his attack and roll, depending on the type of opponents he goes up against, and taking time to test him out and see how he functions, it may be one of those situations where flipping out his mod loadouts might be advisable or suggested. As I mentioned, I know very little about this guy. I know he comes from the sequel trilogy. I have strong opinions about the sequel trilogy coming from the generation I come from, that was largely disappointed by Disney and what they did with it. With that said, though, I'll keep my guy on speed and potency. Probably more than likely, I'm not going to get to utilize this guy. I probably will almost rarely ever at all. But I also would pointing out his abilities, which is clearly including damage and chances. Critical damage mods and critical chance mods would amplify on this. Probably more so than what speed would provide, as well as the potency. But the only thing that speed is good for is for that evasion. That is the only thing I see worth putting speed on him for. So, with that said, that is Resistance Pilot mods. Subscribe to the channel, like the videos, comments, questions, suggestions down below, and thank you for following. May the Force be with you.